All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Sit Heads Meditation Club. My name is John. I organize this group. Sit Heads is a sitting and social group for people interested in deep meditation practice. We get together in person from time to time. We're mostly an online group. If you want to hang out with us, please join us at sit-heads.com. Everything we do is free and donation-based. For this session with Tuere Sala, who I'm going to introduce in a moment, if you find that you benefited from this session or you enjoyed it, I want to encourage you to offer Dhamma, which is a word that means or refers to donations given in the spirit of generosity and gratitude for the teachings. So having done all of that, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome and introduce the inimitable, the remarkable Tuere Sala. Tuere joined us last year for a Q&A. She completely blew all of us away. So we're really happy that she's back. Tuere, for anyone who doesn't know, is a guiding teacher at Seattle Insight Meditation Society. She's been meditating for over 30 years. Like me, she's a former lawyer. And she teaches Vipassana within the Thai forest tradition, a very serious practice lineage that has brought us luminaries like Ajahn Chah, Ajahn Sumedho, basically anyone whose name starts with Ajahn, Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, and the famous Jack Kornfield. But for whatever reason, the Thai forest tradition seems to get less airtime in the sort of internet Dharma circles than the Burmese traditions and some other schools. So I'm hoping this can be a partial corrective to that by having a wonderful Thai forest practitioner with us tonight. So Tuere, I'm going to bring you up here with me. Is there anything that you want to say before we just start to chat?
Let's see. I know we're going to talk a little bit about some things, but some things came up for me. So I want to share a couple of things that I've been thinking about you guys all day. And I'm so glad to be back here. Really, really, really. We did have a wonderful time chatting last time. It was great. And I really have thought about this title, Demystifying Deep Practice. And there's a couple of things I want to share about that before we start in, John, talking and kind of having a back and forth open dialogue. It's really just that I am a staunch urban practitioner. I mean staunch. And I think what we are doing in the Insight tradition of bringing practice into our urban everyday life, I just think this is a game changer. It's very different than the way it's very different than the way Dhamma was presented. It was presented to the monastic core, and then the monastic core helped lay practitioners deepen their practice, steady their practice, and stay connected with practice. And a lot of that practice was, it was partly ritual. So here we are. You know, have never been a monastic. I have never done any monastic time. Some people do go into the monastic order for a short time, mostly men. I've never done anything like that. And yet I have a deep, deep, deep practice. And it's all interconnected to urban practice. So when I talk about urban, I consider myself an urban contemplative, is what I think of. I live a contemplative life. I practice deep Dhamma, and I do not go off into caves and stay in I didn't have to ordain in order for me to have access to deep level practice. And that's what I think I really wanted to make sure we're all kind of beginning to see, that as a practitioner, I started my practice when I was a lawyer. So I was in law school starting my practice and pretty much have practiced ever since then. I have, trial lawyer, I couldn't do any retreats. I had 2 kids. I was single parent. I did weekends. I did sort of like your John, your twice a month extended practice for 3 hours. This is what I did over many, many years of at Seattle Insight. It was this steady coming into the weekend retreats. And when I was able, I would do, when I became a senior trial lawyer, then I could do retreats and go away and do retreats, and other people would carry my caseloads. But what I hope we get into, John, is I can't really remember all the things we touched on, but I hope we plan on touching on this idea that to be a deep practitioner has more to do with your commitment to practice and less to do with where you practice. That you can go, and I know people who go to retreats all the time, but don't let them get angry at work because they can't manage it. And deep practice is really about learning how to stay present with whatever's arising, seeing the fabrication of the mind, seeing the hindrances, and not being pulled by that second arrow. I don't care what the circumstances are in our lives. And so that's what we're doing here in this inside community. And it is, I do not believe it will just kind of rise and fall unnoticed. I think we are going to have a big, 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 big impact on the world. And it may not seem like it, but this is the last piece I'll tell you how you can know we're going to have a big impact on the world. So everybody on this call started meditating at some point before this call. So you all know that the minute you started meditating, it seemed like the mind got worse than better. It seemed like that all hell was breaking loose and I must be doing something wrong because this can't be what they were talking about. Where's the peace and relaxation? But over the course of your practice, if you stayed steady with it, then gradually you begin to see this unfolding of peace, this unfolding of wisdom, this unfolding of insight. So sometimes I look at the world and just think we are at the beginning stages of meditation, and that eventually this steadiness that we have, having us get together, practice deeply, it will unfold and have a major effect on the world in settling down some of this anger and violence. So that's really what I wanted to open with, that we could begin to kind of point our direction.
Yeah, I'm absolutely here. Let's keep talking about that. I had stuff I want to talk about. Nah, forget that. Let's talk about this. And just so people know the structure really quick, Tuere and I are going to chat until the hour mark. That's sort of my little privilege that I get to give myself, but its main purpose is to sort of seed the Q&A period. So you can see the sort of stuff that might make sense to talk to Tuere or ask Tuere about. So we're going to chat for a little bit, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A with all of you. So I'll tell you, Tuere, I don't remember if we've talked about this, but I'm curious what you think about this, because it seems like we're on the same page. My fantasy, it's not a fantasy, my aspiration, because I want to see it be real. My aspiration is I want to see, how there's this wonderful sort of mindfulness movement that's gotten so big. People use apps. Everyone knows what mindfulness is now. It's on the cover of magazines and so forth. And it's mostly at the level of, I've tried it, or, I do a few minutes. It keeps me calm. It's really good. Maybe someday I'll do more. That's like the sort of mass adoption level. Is at the more casual level, which is incredible, right? And absolutely a huge momentous change and a positive one. my hope is that there will be a deep practice movement, a mainstream movement built on the bedrock of that mindfulness movement, that more casual mindfulness movement lays the groundwork. And I don't think it probably can't ever be as big as the mainstream mindfulness movement is right now, just in the same way that there'll never be as many people running marathons as there are joggers. You know, it's just necessarily a slightly smaller circle, but it could still be a big circle. Like, I would love to live in a world where two people are just casually talking and one of them's like, you know, I think I'm going to try and do a month long this summer. And the other person doesn't find that weird. They respond as if the person said, oh, I'm training for a marathon. In other words, maybe it's not the most common thing in the world, but everyone knows what it is. It's totally accepted. It's just a part of our culture. It's just part of what we understand. Imagine that world where it's, where, Beyonce and Olivia Rodrigo are posting about their retreats that they went on, and it's just integrated into the culture to actually practice for transformation or for awakening. That's actually become a mainstream thing. I don't know if I'll live to see that world, but it would be cool.
I don't know if I'll live to see it, but it's definitely coming. I'll give you an example of how you can begin to rest in the truth of this, what you're pointing to. When I started practicing, the idea that you could even have an app to sit with along with you was not even conscious. So it's like, that didn't even exist. I know some of you are pretty young. It's like, what? No app? But no, there was no app, no nothing. You had to sit, and I sat for many, many years in a closet because I wasn't quite sure I wasn't doing some devil worshiping here. So I didn't know anything about the process. We didn't have this framing, this stilting that we have now. Just something was drawing me to sitting quietly, and I would sit quietly in a closet after I put the boys to bed and try to be still. And I was actually trying not to think. That's what I thought the whole point was, which, it wasn't working. But my point is that from the scaffolding that we have now is completely different. Nobody has to practice by themselves at this point. Nobody has to go out there on their own. Anybody that wanted to pick up the practice could pick it up and start right away with a Sangha. But when I started, there just wasn't this idea. I just didn't know anyone that I could even think about talking about this with or practicing with. You can say mindfulness now and people understand what you're talking about. Say meditation and people understand what you're talking about.
Yep.
But the game changer happened, I think, when we had the gift of this pandemic. Because before this pandemic, the idea that you were going to be a practitioner meant you pretty much had to go somewhere and practice with a group, and that you had to be a group person almost. But after, even with the sit heads, I wouldn't be there unless I was in New York, unless I somehow came there. There was just not this sense of us as a community all over the world sitting. And I have a Thursday night group I teach, and there's a guy there that comes from Australia regularly. He's on our, the team that sets the whole thing up. So he comes from Australia, but he comes every Thursday. And he's part of that Sangha. So the point that I'm pointing to is just like all of a sudden Zoom changed our understanding of what a retreat could be, those kinds of happenings will happen more and more and more and more as we go along. And so this idea of having a retreat at home does not seem like a big deal. I mean, for many of you, you may have already done the retreats at home, but for many regular inside practitioners, nobody's doing a retreat at home. And then now, almost everybody I know has done at least one retreat at home because of this pandemic. And so this this is what I think is going to start happening. We are going to gradually see practice become more and more and more a part of our everyday existence.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think it's out there, John. I think it's coming.
I would love to see it. I hope you're right. I think you're right. I think it's going to happen. The question is just when.
Yeah.
But okay, so I want to jump off that and ask you. I've got two questions for you. I don't know if we can hit both, but they're kind of related. So the
Okay.
first one was when you were talking about being an urban contemplative and really pointing to the fact that this is the Dharma is sort of upheld in non-monastic lineages in the West in ways that are very different from how the lineages were primarily upheld in most of Asia. In Tibet, in Tibet and in Japan, there are some traditions of lay lineage holders, but for the most part, monastic, right? And here we are with our jobs, with our families, with our PlayStation 4s, and still, and we are essentially the torchbearers for the Dharma, which is a very different situation. And you painted a really inspiring picture of yourself as a younger person, a very busy person with a very busy and time-consuming career, who nonetheless found the time to take your practice deep. I did notice that you said that at a certain point, you were able to give a little more to, say, retreat time, once your work allowed that. Here's my question, brass tacks.
Yeah.
Just being really real. Don't sugarcoat it for us. In your view, if a person wants to practice for insight, in other words, not for stress relief, as wonderful and totally appropriate as that is, but they're practicing for insight, they're practicing for transformation, dare I say, even awakening in the classical sense. And they're a lay person. What does it take in terms of the practicalities? In other words, if a person can't get away on even a week-long retreat, do you think that's going to be a huge hindrance? Or are you saying, that even with weekend retreats or no retreats, I mean, basically tell me, where's the floor? Okay. Where's the floor?
So think of it like this. When the Buddha brought people into the order, they gave their life over to the Dhamma. So we have an image that giving your life over to the Dhamma means you have to pick up the homeless life and you have to give up whatever your job or whatever it is and become a monastic. And I think that is the way you gave your life over to the Dhamma. Not everybody, because like Dipa Ma, she gave her life over to the Dhamma, but she didn't ever become a monastic. So
and also Dipa Ma maybe was anomalous, right?
Right.
Seems to have been an extraordinarily gifted person in certain regards, an unusual person.
Yes. But my point that I'm trying to say is when Dipa Ma came into the practice, that's not who she was. She was just a suffering wife who had lost her husband, lost some children. So she was just suffering. And what I think the dedication that was required for Dhamma is why people went into monastic practice. That's how you gave your life to the Dhamma. I gave my life to the Dhamma, I am certain, when I was in my early 30s. I am certain of it. I decided I was going to practice, and I decided I was going to awaken. I gave myself a ritual of becoming a Buddhist. I didn't even know how to become a Buddhist. That's why I was in the closet. I didn't even know if what I could do with this. So I did this little ritual on the side, had a talk with God, like, don't get mad at me, but I really think I need to be working in this area. So we're going to kind of do something together, some kind of collaborative practice between God and Buddha. That's what I tried to create. But the idea that I gave my life to the Dhamma, I don't have any question about it. So what that meant was, what I think this means for us as urban practitioners or an inside tradition, giving your life to the Dhamma means when you have some moment of anger, you got to practice with that. That's what this means. When you have some situation at work where you have some thing you got to work with, you got to practice with that. There's this giving your life to practice. And I remember Bhante Buddharakkhita one time said that people think that if they're monastic, they go off and they sit all day, every day. But they don't. They have all these work jobs and all these responsibilities they have to do. They have an urban life. It's just in the monastic order. And then if they want to go on vacation, they go on retreat. And that's what I started doing. So when I say that when I became a senior teacher, senior trial lawyer, I could go on longer retreats, it was because as a junior prosecutor, I couldn't just take off time. I could only take off time when senior lawyers were not taking off time. And so my ability to take extended time was limited because I was the one doing the covering of the calendars when the senior lawyers were gone. Mm-hmm. But when I became a senior lawyer, all the junior lawyers had to cover my calendars. And so I took off way more time, all the time. I got more time off and I took off more time. And that's how I could do retreats. But I don't want to leave you this image that my retreat time was better than the efforts I put in being with this selfing way that we go through life, being with habit energy, understanding dependent origination, fully grasping the Four Noble Truths and the 3 characteristics. I grasped that in weekend non-residentials, in day longs, in sitting in silence, even my 40 minutes every day. So I think you need a daily practice as a commitment. So whatever your daily practice is, I think it has to be more than 10 or 20 minutes. I think you need to put in some willingness to sit. And sometimes your daily practice is going to be strong and sometimes it's not. But it's the overall commitment to have a daily practice. There's an overall commitment to be connected to a Sangha so that you don't practice with your own opinion and that you have something that bounces up against that opinion and you can learn the Dhamma from a cadre of people and not, this is what I think it is, and not ever see our own delusions. So you have a community of practitioners you practice with and you encourage each other, you have a daily practice, and then you do some kind of extended practice. Some periods of time based on your own schedule where you don't do anything but sit, walk, whatever your practice. What I think happens though is that the more committed you are to the practice, the more committed you began to be in the practice. And so after several years of doing the weekends, there's no way I wasn't going to do a retreat. And then I did a week long. And after I did a few week longs, there's no way I wasn't going to do a month long. And then there's no way I'm not going to do 3 months. It's just sort of this is an unfolding that happens naturally. I know people who have done like IMS's Insight Meditation Society's 3 month, they've done them 5, 6, 15 years in a row. But if I were to sit down with them, I don't know how deep they are with the understanding of the inevitability of dukkha. They're still complaining about everything that happens. So this idea that you have to go on long retreats in order to develop deep practice, that's not it. It is your commitment to practice. It's your commitment to practice. So when something's arising, you want to look at that through the Dhamma prism. You want to look at that through a prism eye of the Dhamma and not, how do I fix this? Or how do I make this more conducive? You lose your job? Yeah, there's going to be sadness there. There might be some fear and trepidation, but I'm going to bring that on the cushion and I'm going to see what's really going on here. Is this my ego that's stressed out? Or is this some lack of security and trust that I'm having that's stressed out? What is it that's really causing the self to be so stressed out? Yeah. And that's where I think our unfolding comes from.
I really appreciate the idea that, because it's a hard question to answer, right? What exactly should you do, right? It's sort of a fiddly question. And I appreciate the idea that if the thing to work on is your commitment to the practice and your commitment to the path. And then what naturally happens is what happened to you, which is you'll want to practice more. You don't need to, you don't need a teacher to arbitrarily say, well, you better do this much per day. You better go on this much retreat. Actually, an alternative route is to just work on sort of devoting yourself, sort of feeding yourself to the Dhamma more and more. And then eventually you'll want to go on the week long, the month long, the 3 month. That'll just unfold on its own. Don't need to force that. That's a really interesting perspective that I hadn't considered.
That's exactly what I think. I mean, there is not a moment in anyone on this call's life where the Dhamma isn't, where codependency isn't arising. It is just arising all the time. Yeah. So there is no practice on, practice off. It's not like that. Your wisdom has to grow, and it's only going to grow in circumstances. So if you want to know about disappointment, you got to be disappointed, whether you are disappointed as a monastic or you're disappointed as lay. You still, all of us, it doesn't matter. That's what the Buddha was saying with the second arrow. It doesn't matter who you are. A deep practitioner begins to see that the disappointment is tied to my resistance to the acceptance that something isn't happening the way I want it to. It's the ego's expectation that's having a problem. And you can practice with that, whether you are a monastic or at a retreat, or you just got the call that you weren't selected for that project. That disappointment is the same, regardless of which circumstance you're in.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons I think why, as you said, even if you do a ton of retreat, no amount of retreat will make up for a lack of practice in the midst of your life. And no amount of formal sitting practice either. That doesn't mean you shouldn't sit. You should, absolutely, I agree with you. And you should find time for extended practice. But I definitely believe that if you just meditate for an hour in the morning and then are mindless the rest of your day, it's like you spend an hour on the treadmill and then you're just sort of eating Twinkies the rest of the day and sitting still. It's like you're letting the boulder roll back down the hill, kind of like. Yes. Maybe that's not a good. I don't want to.
But no, I think that's it.
But I also up the hill. But
I think it's the same. But I also want to make a plug here. It's not just that you're sitting and trying to be mindful. It is that you have a group you are connected to.
Yeah.
Because somebody has to push against you. We will not know that we are arrogant unless somebody calls us out and say, Tuere, you're getting a little, feeling yourself a little bit. I have to have somebody tell me that, because I won't know it otherwise. I just think I'm doing the right thing. And of course, you guys
say such a thing to you, Tuere.
Yeah, I'm a Virgo, so I always think I'm right. My way is always the best way.
You're perfect. Don't listen to them.
But really, my point that I'm making is that sometimes we think, I don't want to be in a group because they keep rubbing up against these edges.
Yeah.
And I don't like it, and they don't do it the right way. It's just that group energy. But that is where we see where we need the practice to work, where we need to work on, because nothing outside of us is causing our suffering. It's our own clinging to something other than what the moment is offering us. Yeah. And so being in a group, especially a group where you're rubbed up against all the time, that's going to help you strengthen your practice to work with some of these defilements and difficulties and edges where suffering is. That's what we're trying to work with.
Yeah.
The sitting quietly, I think that just sort of comes with time, because you're processing all this information and you need to turn away into seclusion and say, give me a moment. Let me look at all this stuff I'm seeing. And you're going to want to naturally turn away or go into seclusion so your body can process everything it's learning.
Hear, hear. Let me ask you one more question, and then I'll stop. But the reason I want to ask this question is not because I'm greedy for more one-on-one chat time. I'm above such worldly concerns. But
Sure.
no, just because this is something that I want people to think about potentially poking at with more questions.
Yeah.
So what we haven't talked about is your tradition, the Thai
Yes.
forest tradition. I sort of queued this up earlier.
Yes.
It is a tradition that I think a lot of people in sit heads know relatively little about. And I include myself in that. You know, I'm listening to the collected talks of Ajahn Chah, and they're incredible. I'm really enjoying them. But I don't know exactly what the practice is. And there are other styles of practice where the instructions are so precise that it's like someone's handing you a recipe book. So if you were like, well, what's Mahasi style Vipassana practice like? You know, you almost don't even have to practice it. You could have just read about it and be like, well, it involves this sort of mental notation, you know, it's quite clear. I still don't know. And I've been meditating for a lot of years and reading probably too much. I still don't know how a Thai forest practitioner practices on the cushion. Could you, so here's my question. You don't need to explain the whole, you don't need to break it down first. That'd probably be hard. But a lot of non-Thai forest practitioners in this group, but sincere yogis. So if you were to give us non-Thai forest practitioners a sort of gift of advice or a gift of instruction or a gift of some nuance from the Thai forest tradition that we could perhaps work into our practice, even though it's not Thai forest practice, what would that be?
I think you're right. I mean, I think for a long time I didn't understand what the Thai forest practice was. It's very hard because Thai forest is a little bit more connected to the lineage of the teacher. And so when we say Thai forest, what we are really pointing to is Ajahn Mun and maybe Ajahn Buddhadasa, but we're really pointing to Ajahn Mun's lineage because Cha and Sumedho, Brahmin, all these Ajahns that we think of, that we read about, they came out of Ajahn Mun's kind of lineage. And so, but there are very different Thai teachers that have different ways of articulating. So I'm really going to just articulate a little bit about this Ajahn Mun, the forest tradition. And the reason why it's called a forest tradition, this Thai forest, is because the idea was that Mun was a young, very young, he entered the monastic order very young. I think he was like a little kid. And when he became of age to actually practice away from the monastery, he went into the forest and just sat down. He wasn't a learned man. He didn't go to school, do all this stuff, but he had the Dhamma and he went and just practiced with the Dhamma. That's it, over and over and over, just practice with the Dhamma, which is basically what I'm saying. Except instead of thinking of it as the forest in Thailand, it's the jungle in New York City. It's the jungle in downtown Seattle. It's that kind of urban going into the world. But if I were to say, this is what my thinking is, and another Thai forest teacher might tell you something completely different, but this is what I think, if you were going to try to begin to see the distinction, is Thai forest is based in this practice of awareness, and awareness with a felt sense. So you feel your way through this kind of opening to the awareness of everything, like your peripheral vision. It's still the satipatthana. So you're still aware of the body in sound and the different elements of the satipatthana body. You're still aware in terms of felt sense, the feeling tones, and you're aware of thoughts and emotions, the felt sense of that. And you're aware of the dhammas in general, the presence of a hindrance or the seven factors. But it's less of the pointing of noting moment by moment as you're going along. It's a much softer kind of taking a view of the a peripheral of experience. Now, I say that because from everyone I know, when I listen to their instructions, both Mahasi style, the noting style, and Thai forest, what I think is happening here, or I guess another way to say it is, there's a teaching around, there's wisdom track and there's the Brahma Vihara track. And sometimes we think the heart track or the Brahma Vihara track is a lesser track, and the wisdom track, or this kind of following the breath, moment to moment mindfulness, is the better track. But when you start practicing, and as a teacher, you begin to see the unfolding of people's practice, you begin to see that the wisdom track people eventually turn the corner and start going into heart practice. They start going into opening the heart. So wisdom leads to an open heart. And heart practice leads to a more pointed paying attention moment by moment of a wisdom practice. The two of them converge at some point, and you're practicing the same thing. It doesn't really change much. I think that's the same thing that happens in this Mahasi Thai forest tradition. We start in this more broader, open awareness, felt sense, feel your way through the Satipatthana into mindfulness of breathing. And I think the Mahasi starts with the more pointed mindfulness of breathing, or you're aware of the Satipatthana mindfulness of breathing, but it leads into this larger awareness. So we lead into a more pointedness, and I think the Mahasi leads into a more open awareness. So ultimately, when you have solidified your practice and you feel stable in it, whether you come in through the doorway of Thai forest or you come in through the doorway of Mahasi, by the time we get into the deep concentration levels, we're pretty much all on the same thing. I'm going to be momentarily noting what's happening. I just don't maybe not have the words that go with it. And even as a noter, you're feeling the felt sense of irritation. You're not just saying irritation, peacefulness. You're not just throwing these words out. You're feeling it as you kind of go along. And so the two of us are kind of, I think, heading in the right direction. But I think the confusion is that people tend to want to do exactly what the teacher's instructions are. And so they seem like they're vastly apart. But it's only when you really get into a deeper level of concentration that you begin to see that they're both really pointing to the same direction. But that's how Thai forest, it's starting with this much broader being aware, almost like Uttajaniya has gotten that broader understanding. Even though he's a Mahasi, there's this broader, and then it gets very, very pointed as you go deeper and deeper into his practice. So you get to that Mahasi still the same. Anyway, that's how I would articulate this kind of coming together of the two, and that the distinction is the way I would make it.
No, that makes sense. And I like Tuere, you'll always throw in this little thing that's just a tangent, but then I want to have a whole conversation. You'll just throw it out as like an aside, but I want to have a whole conversation about that. I'm not going to. We're going to open it up to Q&A, but I do just want to point out the way that I love that you pointed out that one potential stumbling block or hindrance for meditators is taking the teacher's instructions too literally, or listening too almost listening too carefully to your teacher. And that is a trap I've fallen into over and over again, where I've even said to one of my teachers, like, they say, what are you doing? And I say, I'm doing such and such. They're like, oh, that sounds a little intense. I said, well, that's exactly, let me quote this passage from your book. And they're basically like, man, you need to chill, you need to chill on the book a little bit. So I really appreciate that. But rather than talk more about it. Let's let other folks talk and ask you questions. So thanks for chatting with me, Tuere. I always enjoy it. And now let's give other people a chance. So we're going to do Q&A now. And if that's okay. Andrew, do you want to ask your question?
Love to. All right. Tuere, great to see you again. Thanks for coming back. So I'm going to go to one of our mutual favorite topics, Brahma Viharas, which you thankfully introduced me to on retreat a couple of years ago and cracked me wide open, which was awesome. Thank you. So my question is this. I was on retreat recently, and the teacher was teaching metta and the Brahma Viharas in what I now understand to be a sort of a dry metta approach, as opposed to a wet metta. And the way that was framed was wet was like you're trying to generate the emotions, whereas dry was, the way it was conveyed was trying to discern kind of the view or the mind state of any of the four Brahma Viharas, and to see which view you were holding, and then be able to have agency to cause and hold the view you intended. Which was a totally different way of going about that for me. And I'm struggling with it, but I'm trying and I'm practicing with it. I'm trying to zoom in on my question, but I was hoping you could help me understand a little bit better the difference between the dry and the wet approach to metta, and in more of this dry side, if you have a take on it. The way it was framed to me was that the view or the mind state does not have any physical sensation to it, right? It's sort of shaping all of conceptual reality, that anything I can experience has already passed through the view. So I guess my question as I'm doing this, I'm trying to figure out, well, if it doesn't have any feeling, how do I see it? Like, how do I see which one I'm in?
I guess what I would say, Andrew, is I don't know if this is I don't know if this is it, but there are two ways to practice metta. And the way I would distinguish them is one is concentration and one is radiating. So the concentration version of metta is just like following the breath. You may not necessarily have a good feeling about the breath. There is the quality of the beautiful breath, where the breath is you're so concentrated and you're so with it that you feel this love just for being able to be present to the breath. But in the building up of concentration, the breath is just the breath. It's dry. It's just, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. And you're pretty much noticing what's happening with the mind. That's what I would think of. I think that would probably be the dry. It's a more concentrated, that you are following the phrasing and you are paying attention to the mind states that you're not getting caught in. So you're not getting caught in the difficult person or the difficult energies that go on when you think about that difficult person, and you're not getting caught in the neutral, you're not getting caught in the people, and you're keeping it very succinct. I would think that might be what the dry is. That's another way to say that dry. It's concentration, the phrasing are pointed, directed, that's what you're doing. Now that's different than radiating. And radiating is this felt sense access to the Brahma Vihara itself. And you're radiating that felt sense out. And you stay with that radiating energy, and not necessarily words or phrases or images. You're staying with the radiation of the Brahma Vihara itself. The dryness on the other one is that you're staying with the phrases, and you're allowing the phrases to help you understand what concentration is, not as a felt sense, but as a mind state, understanding that felt sense. So that's what I think is the distinction between that's the way I would describe the distinction, and that might be easier to understand it that way.
Okay, great. I can keep going asking questions, but thank you very much. I'll if we get to, I'll come back around. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Tuere.
Yeah.
And just by the way, Andrew just for people's knowledge, is the person who connected us initially with Tuere and suggested that we have Tuere come as a teacher. So, deep bows to Andrew for being the but-for cause, as lawyers would say, of this entire situation. So thanks, Andrew. Noah, do you want to ask your question?
Yes. Hi, Tuere.
Hi, Noah.
So in the context of urban practice, when you're rubbing up against people and there's conflict, do you have a magic formula for knowing like when you should stay in a situation and keep getting worn down and when that's an unhealthy situation?
So the idea that you would stay in a situation where there's dukkha and getting worn down, that in and of itself is a self kind of phrasing. That is a mind state that is not based in the wisdom of what Buddha was pointing to. We don't stay in any situation that's unhealthy or unskillful. The thing that Buddha's pointing to, I think, when he says, the difficult situations, we want to stay in the present moment without changing it, is that if you're having difficulty with the truth of reality, so just take a moment and step back a second. Whatever is happening, it is happening. It is the reality of it. So if you're having difficulty with reality, that is the second arrow. The first arrow is it might be a difficult situation. And you need to discern what is the most skillful way to relate to a difficult situation. What is skillful for me I'm in a difficult situation. What's the most skillful thing for me to do? It could be I'm in a bad job and the skillful thing is for me to find another job. And that's what I'm going to start doing. But oftentimes, practitioners will see the solution to the difficult situation as being skillful, but that's not where skillfulness comes from. Skillfulness arises out of first taking the cause of your suffering, which is the second arrow. The cause of your suffering is your resistance to the truth of what's happening. So once you see that resistance and you see, oh, wait, something's happening here. This is bothering me. Then you can get to a skillful understanding. So the best way I can point to it is my root teacher, Rodney Smith. He was a fierce teacher, and he could slice and dice your ego so precisely that you're like feeling it in the whole room. And my reaction would be this kind of pushback. Like, how dare he talk to me like that? I can't believe he said that. And there's all this uproar. Now, I don't know. Maybe some of his judgment was misogynistic or he didn't necessarily not used to Black people. I don't know. But what I do know is my immediate reaction was my own ego. My own difficulty with ego. Once I dealt with the detaching my ego, that's fine. He can say, it's his opinion. He don't know me. He don't know me like that. Let's just say that. Then I can think of what's skillful. And skillful may be leaving the Sangha, but skillful for me, it ended up being staying right here with this teacher because he was going to help me let go of a lot of selfing. And as a lawyer, I had a lot of arrogance and a lot of me-ness. And he really helped me leave a lot of that in order for me to stay with the Dhamma. And as a teacher, not take things personal, what people do and what people say, and people give you acclimates, and I don't take that personal, and I don't take the negative personal. So this learning skillful response is not necessarily tied to figuring out a solving of the problem. The skillful response arises out of first unhooking yourself from the clinging to some situation in time, and then looking at from an unhooked place, what's the best way to do? Okay, I said all that. I'm a deep practitioner, and I'm like nerdy at times with practice. So something that I'm going to point to, I think that's the ultimate goal of where we're coming. Unhook yourself from your own clinging and then move into what's skillful response. But if you're not at that place where you can unhook yourself from the clinging or even see the clinging, then anytime you're having any difficulty, you want to see, can you be with this difficulty? Is it harm or not harm? If there's harm, either to me or to some other person, then you want to move away from harm. There has to be this commitment of non-harm, and you let harm be the gauge. And if there's harm, I need to move away from that harm, however that looks, without adding more harm. You might add harm because you're leaving some person, but that's not harm in the sense of taking someone's breath away, sort of taking someone's life. That is, I'm not staying in this situation anymore, and so I'm leaving. But that kind of discernment, it's going to come if you start practicing with difficulty and not being afraid. Just to keep it simple, the reason why we don't scratch an itch when we're meditating is because we really want to. The reason why we don't shift right away when we feel some pain in meditation is because you're training the mind to learn to be with difficulty without impulsively pushing back on it. And then gradually, more and more and more, you can discern these deeper places of harm, and then be able to skillfully unhook yourself from that harm and skillfully respond. Do you see what I'm pointing to?
Yes, it's very
So
helpful.
it might start out that you just don't scratch an itch, and that might seem like, well, that's stupid. So what if I scratch an itch? And then another one shows up, and then another, and then another. So it might not seem like you're doing much, but when you teach the mind not to follow the impulse of scratching an itch, you are teaching the mind not to follow the impulse of pushing against unpleasant. And then you can discern what kind of response you want to make. So that's what my response would be.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks, Tuere. Thank you,
Welcome.
Noah. Let's see. I don't know if it's Alec or Matthew. We have a twofer in that Zoom window. All right, well, you guys got to figure it out amongst yourselves. But one of you.
I'm joking. It was me.
All right. All right, Alec, I'm bringing you up.
Tuere, you already answered my question and then my backup question. So then I came up with a new question, which was because I didn't want to waste my hand raise. And I'm sorry for putting you on the spot, okay? Because it's going to make you sweat a little bit, and I'm sorry. But do you think that some practices are more effective than others?
I think some practices are more effective for certain yogis than others. So, for instance, Rodney one time told me, okay, I used to just sit with a timer by my desk, right? And I would sit and I would time my sits, and I only sat for the timer, and I spent the bulk of the time looking at the timer, see if I really set it. Because I'm only gonna sit this amount of time and that's it. And then one day Rodney was talking to a group of yogis and he said, give up the timer. And I'm thinking, wait, I have to sit before I go to work. What if I sit too long? Which I never sat too long, but what if I sit too long and I'm late for work? And Rodney said, your body mind will know when it's time to get up. Now, a group of us took a challenge to do this. Some people could not do that. It just did not, their whole mind spent the whole time wondering what time it was. But when I got rid of the timer, it was the best thing that ever happened. Because I'm pretty much late to everything. So time is a very difficult thing for me. And it's like Black people time. We don't have that kind of time. So when I actually let go of the timer, my sits fell more in line with who I actually was. But for people who are very time oriented, letting go of the timer might cause them more difficulty. So instead of thinking of, and you can notice this even in the Dhamma, Buddha would say some things to some people, and then you read another sutta and he says something completely different. And it sounds like he's competing or conflicting what he's saying, but he's saying it to different types of people. And we have different types of practitioners. I'm an averse person. Some people are greedy people, so they're very desirous all the time. I can't see my own desire, but I can see my aversion in a heartbeat. Some people can't see that they're averse, but they see they want all the time. But it's really the same thing, because if you want this, that means you don't want what you got. And if I don't want this, it means I want something I don't have. So they're really the same thing. But how you get through the door may be very, very different. So what I would say is whatever helps you stay in this moment, keeps your sort of heart alive, keeps you interested and curious about the present moment, that practice is the practice you stay with. And then at some point, that practice is going to plateau. It's not going to work anymore. And then you're going to need something further to keep you there, and just follow along in the practice that keeps you engaged in the present moment and interested in what's going on, what's happening here, where am I clinging and holding on to. Do you see what I'm pointing to?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alec. And thank you, Tuere.
Yeah.
All right. Oh yeah. Yeah, Bijan. I'm bringing you up. And then we have a question that was asked via private chat to me, so I'll ask that one afterwards if we have time.
Okay.
All right, Bijan, go nuts.
Hi, thanks, Tuere. So I was inspired for this question hearing about just the previous one about different things for different people. And there's a third type I know that the Buddha mentioned, which was the delusional type, which is actually something that I feel I've been experiencing a lot in my current practice, very much like, what's happening? What am I doing? Oh, I'm in the present moment, but I thought I was actually in the present moment, but I'm not, kind of thing. And it feels like a sort of combination of apathy and absent-mindedness. The absent-mindedness is something more clear. There's this certain situation of like, you're absent-minded to come back to the breath or come back to the meditation object. But what I'm noticing now is maybe a little bit more of an apathy that is causing the mind wandering, in the sense of like coming back to the breath, but maybe I don't really care about the breath in some way. There isn't that kind of, once I come back to it, there's nothing really holding in a form of concentration. So I guess my question is, for someone who is having trouble with concentration, not exactly like noticing when the concentration is leaving, but like having sort of building up the concentration. I'm wondering if you have any advice for that, or someone experiencing apathy, maybe, to be more concise too.
So there's all kinds of reasons. I'm just writing 3 things here. Okay, so how long do you practice? Do you practice a lot? would you say?
Yeah, I would say 40 minutes to an hour, 5 days a week.
Okay. And so this, and how long have you been practicing?
2 years now.
2 years. Okay. So some of what might be showing up, it could be one of these three things. You got to kind of feel your way into it. So sometimes what we don't have is we don't have the softness of mindfulness. The sati is very soft. It doesn't seem like it's soft because we kind of talk about it like it's stay with the breath, stay with the breath, stay with the breath. But it's actually more of a willingness to stay with the breath. You know, there's a softening quality to mindfulness. And if you're too rigid, then it's almost like you are bouncing off the mark. So you're not quite landing because you're too hard. At the same time, you might be soft, like a willingness to stay with the breath, but then you don't have enough investigation. So you don't have enough curiosity or interest. And so that points more towards this kind of that points to that felt sense, feeling your way through the experience of the breath. You're feeling it. You're not thinking breath. You're feeling breath. So you're interested, you're soft, and there's this interest of feeling breath, and those two can come together. You have to see which one of these there is. It isn't necessarily, I'm not concentrated. The third thing is that concentration is heavy, and I think of mindfulness as light. So sometimes we have too much concentration. This is kind of weird, but sometimes we can have too much concentration and not enough mindfulness. So there's almost like a boredom because the mind is like here, 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 but there's not enough mindfulness and uplift and kind of that softening interest in what's there. And that can keep us like the mind's like, okay, we've seen one breath, we've seen them all, okay. And the other side, we can aim our attention, but we don't have enough concentration to sustain it. And that comes from also, again, not having enough interest in what is here. The bottom line is anything your mind is interested in, you are not going to struggle to stay with it. There's no struggle to watch TV. If you're interested in the movie, I don't care. If the movie's not any good, yeah, they can do all kinds of special effects, but you're going to fall asleep. You're going to start thinking about other stuff. You'll be on your phone. Like, you know, I know them. I'm checking in every once in a while, but I'm not really listening to anymore. That lack of listening, that lack of connection can come from, I'm not interested in this. So if your object is the breath, that's the anchor that you want to keep, it may be that anchor is too subtle for you, and you might need to think about another anchor to get you concentrated and still, and then go to the breath where you're more relaxed. Or, you know, you're go to the breath after you get more subtle. You're at the subtle level that the breath actually is. So sound might be a better way, or body sensations, a better way to get you to sustain your attention. And then when you get still and stiller, then you can turn towards this breath that's very subtle, because you're subtle too. That's what I think I would begin to question. And just this questioning will bring up interest. And what is this? That's why you don't care whether your mind leaves the breath, because you're not making it leave the breath anyway. It's just leaving. You don't know why. So get interested in why it's leaving. Where did you go? How long did you stay there? What did it feel like? And then you begin to generate this interest, and that interest is what's going to keep you steady as you know, steady as she goes. You're going to stay right there. So just think interest. Is it light enough? Is it soft enough? Am I rigid? And is there enough capacity to sustain my interest here?
Thank you. That's very useful. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Thanks, Bijan. Thanks, Tuere.
Okay.
So I have a question that I'll ask on behalf of the questioner.
Okay.
Then I have one more question after that, but I'm not sure we'll have time for it, unfortunately. But that's okay. So the question that I have here was, can you advise how to find a teacher in the age of Zoom?
So yes, it's easy to find a teacher in the age of Zoom. What is not as easy is to find a teacher that you can regularly connect to. But all of us as teachers, we're always teaching somewhere. And there's always this capacity to find where the teacher is teaching and then go to that Zoom and be with them and listen to them. It's harder now because you used to could go to a retreat and then there was time spent with one-on-ones with the teacher on your questioning, and you gradually the teacher learns your practice and you learn from the teacher, and it unfolds in that way. And it's a little different now. I'm hoping that we're going to open back up to the in-person retreats, and we can develop more. But when it comes to, let's say you can't really do retreats like me, you're pretty much stuck with doing the weekends like I was, or you're doing days of mindfulness and you want to check in with a teacher. I do think that there's you have to find the sanghas where the teachers are teaching. For instance, I teach at Seattle Insight, or I'm teaching here. So then you have to go to that Sangha so you can ask a question and you can begin to build a rapport with the teacher. Yeah. That's probably the best way to begin to build a rapport with a teacher, at least until we go back to in-person retreats and things.
Yeah, thanks, Tuere. And it's a slow process, right? You slowly get to know each other. The teacher slowly starts to recognize you, starts to learn about your practice. Yeah, I think that's great advice. It's not easy to make a one-on-one connection with a teacher in this, especially right now when there are not that many. I mean, there are a lot of teachers, but not compared to how many students there are, right? Yeah. So it's hard, and yeah, I think it just requires patience and persistence and sincerity, and just do what Tuere suggested.
And I do believe strongly that the deeper your practice gets, you'll be surprised at how many tools come up your way simply because your practice is getting deeper.
Yeah. And what do they say when the student is ready, the teacher appears?
It does. And all kinds of resources appear when you become ready. I wanted to go on a long retreat, 6 weeks at IMS, and I wanted to do it so bad. And it just so happened that I had to do this huge project at my job that took a lot of extra time. And at the end of that project, I had the necessary time to go on a long retreat. And so I asked my supervisor, I'm like, well, can I use this time all at one time? And he said, yeah, it's your time. And I always remember that it was because of that project that I hated putting all that time in that gave me the extra time to be able to go on that 6-week retreat. So you never know what's going to come your way. You just stay with the practice, you stay with your commitment, and you think on these things that you're needing, and it comes your way. I don't know how. I don't know how, but I know that you take care of the Dhamma and the Dhamma takes care of you.
There you go. And go to Seattle Insight now and then. And come to Sit Heads now and then.
Yeah.
Just some pro tips for you.
That's right.
Just some thoughts for the mind. All right. So that brings us to basically the end here. So Tuere, once again, you ripped it. I'm so glad that we were able to bring you back.
Thank you.
You're awesome. We're big fans here. Please come back again sometime.
I will.
And I want to apologize to anyone whose questions we didn't reach. Come back and hang out with us. We've got other great teachers coming, and we'll have Tuere come and join us again. Tuere, are there any last things that you want to say before we wrap?
No, I am just so happy to see you. I so appreciate your dedication. Truly, truly, truly. And I just want to encourage you to stay with it. Don't let anything get in the way of your Dhamma. Don't let anything get in the way of your practice. Nothing. So if you can't go to a retreat, you practice anyway. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, just don't let anything get in the way of it. I really, really, I think we're going to make a difference in the world. I think we're going to have a big impact in the world. All
Perfect
right?
note to end on.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tuere. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your
Thank you
presence.
so
Thanks for your
much. Thank you.
questions. Good night, everybody. See you
Good
soon.
night. Thank you.